I became a PT and I love this profession because of how you can help people in that way. And I think the way you can empower people with their own body is beautiful, I think. Like, especially with high-level athletes. I've been so fortunate to work with runners and people up in Boulder who are so motivated, who are so jazzed about movement. It's awesome. Yeah, just to be able to help people either like avoid surgery, recover from a surgery, get back into running and when they never thought they could or they're going to hang up the hat. It's really, really rewarding.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Hydro for sponsoring this episode. Hydro is an immersive workout experience designed to bring the physical, mental, and emotional experience of on-water rowing straight to your home. Hydro workouts are quick, efficient, and low impact. Rowing for just 20 minutes a day provides you with a full body workout, which engages 86% of your major muscle groups. For context, cycling engages 44%. Head to hydro.com to check them out. That's hydrow.com to learn more. Be sure to use the code FTLR100 to save $100 on your order. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. I've learned it isn't nearly as hard as you think. Freedom Solar Power makes it simple. They provide a turnkey solution that is focused on educating their customers on the experience from installation to everyday use and savings. They ensure you have all the information needed to make sure going solar is right for you. From firsthand experience, it makes sense both financially and for the environment. With no down payment required, solar not only adds immediate value to your home, but it's also great for the environment and might even provide immediate savings, not to mention the year-end tax benefits, a credit of 26% this year. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida, and there are plenty of other great options nationwide. This episode is brought to you by Gooder. Gooder has the slickest shades around for only $25 and $35. They don't slip or bounce, and they stay on my face way better than more expensive sunglasses do. If you'd like to support me and the show, treat yourself to a pair or two or three of Gooders and head over to gooder.com and get 15% off your entire order with the code FTLR. That's 15% off at gooder.com, code FTLR. Your face will thank you. This episode is brought to you by Revel Race Series. Revel is an incredibly fast and remarkably beautiful series of full and half marathons that take place in the most scenic U.S. locations. All the races feature a fast downhill slope and spectacular scenery. Their next race takes runners from the canyons of the Wasatch Mountains to the foothills of Salt Lake City, Utah on September 10th for the 10-year anniversary of Revel Big Cottonwood. Register at runrevel.com with code FTLR for $10 off. And welcome back. We have Dr. Sarah Ceschin joining us today from Boulder, Colorado, with a side of Alfie sitting here. So hopefully he's going to be nice and quiet. Sarah, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, Jonathan, thanks for having me.
Of course. So the first question is always a tough one. Who is Sarah?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this. And this might be funny, but I did some research for this question.
Who did you research with?
Well, what's funny is I started to think in my head, who is Sarah? How am I going to answer this question? And then within 5 seconds, I was like, wait a minute, who is Jonathan? And so I was like, I feel like I've met you and I know you, but I don't know as much about you as I would like to. So I started listening. Well, I've been listening to this podcast for a long time. And then I started listening to some of the podcasts you've been on. And did you know that there's another Jonathan Levitt who's a chess master?
I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, I'm sure he probably knows.
I learned that like when Google became a thing.
Oh, and you could Google your own name. Yeah. Oh, I should have done that for this question. That's funny. Like, who else am I out in the world that I don't know?
Not this Sarah, but the other Sarah.
But the other Sarah Ceschin. But to answer the question, as I've deflected for a little bit, Sarah is a runner. Sarah is a physical therapist. I am an adventurer. I love being in the mountains. I'm Italian. I love to cook. I love to eat. And I love to have a good time.
Cool.
Yeah.
And we connected through PR Labs, which is your place of work.
Yeah.
And it's been fun getting to know you and your dry needling abilities and other amazing skills as well.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to dive into this here with you.
Thanks.
So I guess the second question, so you mentioned you're an adventurer, you do all the things, cooking, eating, etc. Do you remember your first run?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I can't say that I remember my very first run because, as kids, you just kind of like run around the playground for God knows what reason. But when I think about this question, the vivid memory I have in my head of my first run is like a 4th grade mile test in elementary school. And it was like a hot, humid day. And I bet my mile time was like 27 minutes. I was like, I hate this. I don't know why we have to do this. I'd rather like be playing football. I was a huge tomboy and kind of still am. But my memory of my first run was not a pleasant one.
I have many of the same memories. I remember faking throwing up to get out of the mile in middle school. We used to run it there's this big grass field behind our school. So we'd like walk over to it and we'd run must have been one lap around it. And I remember like in the middle, I was like, bleh. And I like made the noise and everything. And I just walked away. I'm like, clearly people saw that I didn't throw up. But I stopped running and I told the teachers that I threw up and that was it.
And it worked?
And it worked.
All right.
Till the next year. And I probably did it the next year. But this was, this must have been 7th grade when we started doing that. But It's funny how and then I played baseball and hockey growing up. And so running was always like the punishment and didn't like it. And now, we're actively choosing to go out and do it.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I was thinking about that with this podcast too. I feel like as you're growing up, and this was my experience in the Midwest back in Wisconsin, but like you start these fitness tests in elementary school, which is kind of wild. And I feel like they bred you to hate running. And now you have this wonderful podcast where you ask people their why of running and everyone talking about their why. And it's so funny that we don't feel like we need to do that with other sports. Like I don't really talk about why I played volleyball. What was my why?
Yeah.
But especially back to my family in the Midwest, they're like, why do you run? And I have to explain it to them, especially since I hated it when I was little. But
So I've had this conversation before, and I think that a lot of it is due to the amount of time you spend in your own head when you're doing the sport.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you're playing basketball, your mind is actively engaged in it. Volleyball, probably the same thing. Baseball, unless you're, in the outfield and the hitters suck. But with running, there's so much time to think. Mm-hmm. And so I think it drives a certain kind of interest. But then I was having we were having this conversation in Austin at Endeavor Run a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And Peter Bromka, I think, made the point, who is, I believe Peter is the most referenced person on this podcast. Anyway, he was like, but there are other podcasts about other sports and this does happen. And maybe we're just isolated and don't really know about it. But if you're out there and you listen to a tennis podcast or a basketball podcast exploring the why of basketball, but maybe it doesn't exist. I don't know. It's, I certainly haven't seen it. I did meet someone who does a podcast about golf, and he talks about his experience as a Black golf player and like why he plays golf.
Yeah.
And through the lens of a guy who was told like, my bags are over there. And he continued to play despite, obstacles like that. And his podcast is all about, now I want to look up I'm going to look up the name of the podcast because those who are listening should tune into it because it's fantastic.
Yeah, that makes me almost want to have a retreat that's not just running, but have so many people from other endurance sports and aspects talking about like why we do these things. Because even though we do different sports, everybody has why.
Right.
Yeah.
So the podcast is actually Group Golf Therapy, and it's the podcast of intersection. It's a podcast about the intersection of golf and mental health, how the sport makes us laugh, cry, and bubble with rage. So
I love that.
It does exist.
Yeah, that's also very timely because I think there's a big golf tournament happening right now.
The Masters.
The Masters. Thank you. The biggest
in Augusta.
one.
A tradition unlike no other.
Yes.
A tradition. Yeah. Anyway.
Like no other. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So adventures, Colorado.
Yeah.
When did you move to Colorado?
Moved to Colorado almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years in May. I graduated from PT school. And then within a week of graduating, like packed up my car, didn't have a job or a place to live, but came out here. I just knew I wanted to be, like everybody else that moves out here, but wanted to be close to mountains and camp and hike and do all the outdoorsy stuff that there is out here. And it's been awesome. Within the first month of moving here, my husband and I did a 14er, which probably was a mistake now, knowing. But yeah, I don't think we're going to leave.
So you moved here without a job and just betting on yourself.
Just betting on it, yeah. I mean, I had just graduated, so I was going to have to go through that job search process wherever I was.
Yeah.
And so really when you're in PT school, you have to your license is only specific to the state that you live in and practice in. And so before taking any of the exams, I kind of had to figure out where I was going to live and where I was going to practice. So I had made that decision before I graduated. But yeah, was just like, well, I'm going to have to look for a job anyway, so I might as well be where I wanted to be.
So this sort of proves the hypothesis that I have that people in Colorado, so I've had a lot of people who live in Colorado on the podcast. I've had a lot of conversations about this topic with them. And I think that a place like this is made up of a lot of people who bet on themselves, right? Like, do you have family out here besides your husband?
That's a good question. Just an aunt and her kids. And she's been here for about 20 years. She also grew up in Wisconsin. So just her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because so many people come here without family and they come here maybe not knowing anyone. They're just like, this is where I want to be. And I'm betting it's going to work. And I think that when you bring a lot of those people together, like really cool things can happen.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Because when we moved here, I felt like it took no time to make a circle of friends and a family because everyone is maybe in that same boat, but has moved here and just wants to create those communities and find those communities. Which is like another beautiful part about Colorado and maybe specific to Boulder. I don't know. I've felt the most love and sense of community in Boulder than anywhere else. I don't know what your experience has been.
Yeah. I mean, like it's felt like home before I moved here.
Yeah.
I used to come here, 3 or 4 times a year for work, and it like felt like leaving home every time I would leave.
Oh, man.
And so the first time I flew back here while living here, I was like, this is awesome. I'm like coming home. I went to California for Western States, and that was my first work trip, or it was my first trip from like my own home in Boulder. And I drove myself to the airport. So my car was there. And so I was driving myself home. And like when you're coming back from Denver, the Denver airport to Boulder, you're just staring at mountains the whole time.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is incredible. I can't believe that this is home. So when it comes to building that community, how did you facilitate that for yourself?
Yeah. Because I am a runner and like to run, maybe that it was easier for me because that is so prevalent here in Boulder. But honestly, I like went on Meetup. This was, of course, all pre-pandemic, but like went on Meetup and looked for a running group and went through a few weeks of like, should I go? Shouldn't I go? I'm not fast enough. I don't know. I won't fit in. I'll be behind. But I was like, you know what? No, just go. And so I found this like Monday night run club where they ran 3 miles and went to a brewery in Boulder. And so went and like everyone was super welcoming. I don't think anybody was from Colorado. Everyone was transplants. And then since then, I think the betting on yourself phrase is really interesting, but so right. Like once you do it and you put yourself out there, you just receive this like giant hug from Boulder that's like, it's okay, you belong. Come join us. And so since then, just slowly but surely, like meeting all these wonderful people and creating this little family. And it evolves as you live here. Like you meet new people, your group just like changes and grows and everything. And yeah, it was wild I still say this to the friends that I have now, like how quickly we just all grew so close together and still are.
Can you talk a little bit more about the what you said about, am I fast enough? Am I, is this right?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are hesitant to join groups because they don't feel that they're fast enough. And this podcast will be airing after the Boston Marathon, but at Boston, I'm hosting a panel on the Boston running community.
Yeah.
And that's going to be one of the things that we talk about because so in that panel, it'll be represented by Heartbreakers, November Project, and Pioneers Run Club. And so traditionally, some of those clubs are known as like the faster people and whatnot. And so it'll be an interesting conversation around like, how do you get out of it what you're looking for? So curious your perspective and how you sort of rectified that and showed up.
Yeah, well, I love that conversation is happening. And it'll be interesting in your perspective too to see how that conversation happens in Boston versus like out here in Boulder. I guess what I thought about it is I don't really particularly care about my pace or how fast I am, whatever, only when I'm training or just to myself. But I didn't want to be the slowest because I knew that I wouldn't be able to talk to anybody. Not that the slowest, but that like, if I get left behind, then I'm not going to meet people. And that's the main goal.
Or if you're like trying to keep up, you won't be able to talk.
Yeah, I won't be able to talk. Yeah. I'll be spitting maybe, which like then I'll just go home. But at that point. So yeah, it's not that I didn't think I would be accepted necessarily.
It was more logistical.
Yeah, it's more logistical. Yeah.
So it's funny. So my perspective, I've been running, it's weird to think like 10 years now, almost 10 years. I basically started in 2013, but I've only progressed to where I am now in the last couple of years. And in Boston, I was like pretty average. And now in Boulder, I'm like pretty slow relative to like I'll run into Gwen Jorgensen and we'll run together. Yeah. And she's an Olympic gold medal, like that kind of stuff. And it's so fascinating. Or like I'll run with Boulder Underground and like all of the women are 240 marathoners.
Amazing. Yeah.
And it's like, it's really interesting how here you can find yourself, like there's always someone faster, like a lot faster. And there's potentially someone slower. It's a little harder to find sometimes, but I was talking with Gwen about it actually, and she was like, yeah, I'm really loving this because I can find someone at her level. It's easier to like, I want to run that pace. I want to run this pace. I want to like, she knows the kind of person to look for on a certain day. And like, I've gotten to the place where like if I want to run slower, I'll ask a friend. If I want to run faster, I'll ask. Like, it's cool to be able to have that kind of array or like scope of training partners.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a good point. I think for me, I also love that there's that many different communities and different levels of runners and athletes out here. I think the nerves come from when you're new, you want to find that community and you just never know. You just never know. And sometimes you just have to kind of throw yourself in and know that like people will love you regardless. Right. And it's okay if you go to I did that one time. I can't remember what run group it was, but I went to a run group and I was like, okay, this is clearly not my pace yet. And that's okay. I'll see you guys maybe like in a year when I'm a little more acclimated. But yeah, you're just trying to find where you are. And what is funny about it is I had the thoughts of, am I fast enough or whatever when I first moved here? But now like we tried to have a run club at PR Labs last summer. And I remember having patients asking like, well, what are the paces? Like, I don't know, I'm probably not fast enough. And I remember feeling so, don't say that. Like you're always going to, pace doesn't matter. Just come. And so I know that I didn't feel that way of having people of all paces and whatever come. So it's interesting to see both sides. And I don't know how to tell someone to not have that imposter syndrome or have those emotions because I have them too to myself.
Well, at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't.
Like you're not a better person because you're faster.
Not at all.
You're not a worse person if you're slower.
No.
And I think that's the Like that's the takeaway. And so like we've now hosted a bunch of group runs out of PR Labs.
Yeah.
And I find it challenging to do it because I want to make sure that like the people at the back are having just as much fun as the people at the front. And sometimes the group leaders are at the front and sometimes they're at the back and sometimes they're in the middle. And logistically, it's easier for me to be towards the back because I'm doubling when we do it. So it's like, oh, sure, 9-10 minute pace is great for me right now. But like I've had some great conversations with the people that are bringing up the rear and like they're experiencing group runs in a way that they never had before, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, and I hope that people, especially if you're in Boulder and you can come to the Inside Tracker runs, I feel like it's also not just about the run. So I hope people know that it is a fun run. And part of it obviously is about the running and meeting people on a run and encouraging everyone to come out together to run. But it's so much more than that. So if you don't see the people you want to meet or get to talk to people you want to talk to during the actual physical run, like the community and the social aspect will always be there. And you'll get to have that.
I think that's true out of any
run. Yeah, for sure. It's not just about the running part.
So talk to me about PR Labs. So Kate has graciously sponsored a couple episodes of this podcast, and I've seen most of the providers within PR Labs, and I've seen you for dry needling and PT and whatnot. We may have to talk about my hamstring later.
Ooh, uh-oh.
Curious about how you got connected with the crew over there.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm so fortunate to be connected. I met Kate. So I moved to Colorado. It all started when I was 5 years old.
I'd like to thank the Academy.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going
My grandmother.
Yeah. But no, so I branched off to do private practice 3 years ago up in Boulder. And so started in a location where Kate was practicing out of. So that's how I met Kate. And we just bonded so instantaneously. And then I had moved out of the office into a different location and she was looking for new space. So she came together. And throughout that whole time of knowing Kate, she had talked about having this like collaborative clinic. And I was like, heck yeah, girl, that is totally my dream. And so finally in 2020, end of 2020, she found this space in Boulder. She was like, we're doing it. We're getting it. It's happening. And she's like, I would love for you to come, but no pressure, whatever. And of course I was like, yep, I'm coming, whether you want me to or not. But yeah, so opened it in January 2021, PR Labs. And since then it's been so fun to watch it grow, especially since knowing that it's been Kate's dream for so long. So what it is essentially is a co-op, if you will, a sports medicine co-op with all sorts of practitioners. So Kate leads the massage therapy group, and there's 3 awesome massage therapists there. Myself for PT, Ellen the chiro. There's a couple personal trainers. We've had some nutrition people work with us.
And a bunch of dogs.
Yeah, got to have the dogs. Alfie should come too. And so in this short, what has it been, 16 months now? It's just been really fun to all be in a space together. And I know that these types of clinics exist in Boulder, which is awesome. Like the more collaborative we can be, like 1000% better. But I've never been in a space like PR Labs, and I don't think I ever want to go backwards into clinics that I used to be in. I can refer my patients to whoever I need to, and we're all in the same building. We have meetings together. We discuss our patients together. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So I've had this nagging psoas issue for a while, and it's been managed and made better. And I've worked with Ellen on strength training stuff, and I've worked with you on dry needling, and Kate with massaging that area is not fun.
No.
I'm like, Kate, if you push any harder, I'm going to throw up in my mask.
Gross.
This is disgusting. She's like, great. That means I'm in the right spot.
Yeah, that means I'm going to just stay here. That's what you want to hear.
And then a handful of other things that have popped up and gone away. But Ellen was like, you gotta lift some weights. And so I've finally bought weights, and nice. I'm making that excuse go away. No, but it's been cool that I've gone in and I show up to an appointment with Kate, and she's like, yeah, I talked with blah, blah, blah about this and consulted with, based on your last whatever. And it's cool that it feels like a team, which is super cool. So, and you've also launched coffee chats. What is it called?
Clinicians collaborating over coffee. I feel like it's how we say it.
What is this?
Oh gosh. We've only done 2 so far, but man, they're fun. So just Ellen and I realized we have a ton of fun working together. And what's so crazy, and I think we said this in our first episode, if you will, PTs and chiropractors don't work together. There's this huge, I don't know, I'm bumping my fists, head to head.
We should start doing this on YouTube so you can get the
no
visual
one can see
effects
what I'm
of
doing
this.
right now. But
you'd see the fist bumping, you'd see Alfie sleeping, which is really nice. And his legs
best.
moving.
In the sunshine on a Sunday. So I should say these professions butt heads, which is so unfortunate, but we've had this great opportunity to work together at PR Labs. And so we wanted to use this YouTube channel to show people how we work together, what makes us different, what makes us the same, and talk through injuries and just have that conversation about different running injuries and how we both approach them differently, but also together, and especially at PR Labs, how we would, treat. Our last episode was on Achilles tendonitis, how we would do that together potentially. So it's been really fun. Yeah. And to be kind of goofy with it and show people who we are. So if anyone has any suggestions for what they want us to ramble on about, let me know. Yeah.
Strength training, the value of strength training.
How to avoid painful massages in the SOAS.
Yeah.
Yes.
Strengthening the calves so that they're not
always tight.
Moving on. Thanks again to Hydro for supporting the podcast. I've been enjoying my Hydro to fit in bonus cardio that doesn't take much time at all, as even a 10 to 15 minute row feels like a solid workout. It's a fun experience to be able to row on familiar routes or explore new ones on the water. Head to hydro.com, that's HYDROW.com to learn more. Be sure to use the code FTLR100 to save $100 on your order. Thanks again to Freedom Solar Power for supporting this episode of the podcast and our environment by providing an easy, green energy source. The buying process was fascinating and eye-opening, and I am excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious about going solar in your home, message me on Twitter or Instagram, and I'd be happy to help your journey by providing some great resources. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company that's been installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. Not in any of those states? Don't fret. My parents have the same panels from SunPower that were installed by a different company in Massachusetts. SunPower is the best in the business, and that's what Freedom Solar uses. I've enjoyed working with the whole team over at Freedom Solar, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks again to Gooder for supporting this episode. I have a few different styles of shades, and I've been loving them on runs or while at the pool. At $25 a pop, you can leave a pair in your car so that you'll never be without some shades. You can feel good about your purchase too, as 1% of Gooder's annual gross sales, not profits, go directly to environmental nonprofits working towards making our world a better place. If you'd like to support me in the show, treat yourself to a pair or 2 or 3 of Gooders and head over to gooder.com and get 15% off your entire order. That's 15% off at GOODR.com with the code FTLR. Your face will thank you. Revel Race Series is an incredibly fast and remarkably beautiful series of full and half marathons that take place in the most scenic U.S. locations. All the races feature a fast downhill slope and spectacular scenery. Their next race takes runners from the canyons of the Wasatch Mountains to the foothills of Salt Lake City, Utah on September 10th for the 10-year anniversary of Revel Big Cottonwood. Featuring a speedy downhill slope and spectacular scenery, this race will be sure to help you set your PR and finally hit that BQ time, as it's the fastest marathon and half marathon in the state of Utah. Register at runrevel.com with code FTLR for $10 off until July 31st. You're sort of reflecting on something I love to talk about, which is fun and having fun doing whatever it is that you do. And I think that if you're not having fun, what's the point? And I caveat that with to an extent. But
yeah. Type 2 fun, type 3 fun.
You need to anyway, it's cool to see anytime I walk in that door or see you out running or see you on social, you're having so much fun. Is that intentional? Is that just who you are, how you are? You're always laughing too.
I appreciate you. I guess that is just who I am. I have always felt that way too. And I know you've had this conversation a lot with other people on the podcast, and I know you feel this way about your job and running. Like, man, if it wasn't fun, it wouldn't be sustainable.
Right.
Yeah. And I've always felt that way about my profession and going through school or kind of navigating things. I obviously want to stay professional, but I think fun totally has its space and its spot. Yeah, I guess that is just how I am. But I think if you didn't make some of this stuff, especially when you're talking about like some of the serious stuff like injuries or whatever, you'll miss certain aspects of it that are really important, I think. If you don't try to make it fun or make people happy or be goofy with something, I think we should all, find our sense of humor to some extent with
Totally.
things.
We're all just adult-sized children.
We really are. Yeah.
And some of us are child-sized children. Speaking of fun, so when you moved to Colorado, you went straight up a 14er. Talk about the adventures you've been on while
being here.
While being here.
Yeah.
And like where does that desire and interest come from?
Yeah. Well, before we started recording, you were talking about Gold Hill and biking up Gold Hill. The first time, so I've dabbled in cycling more since moving out here.
It's hard not to.
It's hard not to. I mean, to dabble in anything, really.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know if I'll ever mountain bike because I have the unfortunate eye of seeing like the aftermath of mountain biking. Like, I will never do that. But so
You're like the ER doc that's like, yeah, those are the things I'm not going to do because I see too many of the.
I'm jaded. I'm unfortunately jaded. Yeah. But kind of recent adventure that I've been on is I biked up Mount Evans, or formerly known Mount Evans.
Which is a 14er.
Which is a 14er. It's Mount Blue Sky now for everybody out there. Fun fact.
Huh.
Yeah. Anyway, so I biked up it and it was the first time. So physical therapists do a lot of things that they would tell their patients to never do. And I
out of fun or out of like research?
Well, I think it was for the best if I am going to talk about injury prevention. But so I do bike fits. I work with cyclists and it's really fun. And so I feel like I do some of these adventures to learn more about my patients. Like I've gotten into climbing recently because I treat a lot of climbers and push myself to do some of these things because they're also like a learning opportunity. But I biked up Mount Evans and I had never biked with clip-in pedals before. So
you needed the power.
I needed the power because I was like, there's no way I'm getting up and down this thing on regular pedals. Like that's going to hurt my knees and my quad, whatever. So I was like, I'll just buy them Friday. And we were doing it on Saturday. And I fell like 1,000 times in the parking lot trying to learn and was like, well, here we go.
Might as well go up a
Here
14er.
goes another. Yeah, which I would definitely, if a patient asked me, I'd be like, yeah, you should probably not do that. But here I am. I did it anyway. And that was a really cool experience. I just suggest it if you haven't.
How long is that loop? Or is it out and back?
It's an out and back, and it depends on where you start. You can start kind of right off of I-70. There's a parking lot that people will start. So if you start there, which we did, and you go to the top and down, it's 55, 60 miles. But if you start in the town, I think by Echo Lake, Summit Lake, which is where people start, I think, if they hike Mount Evans. If you start there and go up and down, I think it's like 25, 26 miles. But it is, you were talking about like just the slow grinds, and it gave me some like PTSD of like grinding up Mount Evans. But it's gorgeous. Going down is actually the worst part of that whole adventure.
Yeah. I mean, I was like white knuckling yesterday, 40 miles an hour, like clasping the brakes.
Yeah.
It's like, I thought about it for a second. I was like, I kind of wish I could like take a bus down.
Yeah. Did any part of you want to hop off your bike and run your bike down the mountain? Because I almost did that.
No part of me.
I'd rather just run this bike and not be on this.
No, I mean, it was gorgeous. I did stop to like take photos and stuff. But it's interesting how you describe like doing things so that you can experience it. My first marathon was kind of for that reason.
Yeah.
I was working for another company that worked in the running space, and a lot of our customers were using our product for marathons.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, oh, how do you use this for marathons? And then I didn't really know how to answer, so I ran a marathon.
That's one way to do it.
Now I'm in it.
Yeah.
The cycling thing here is, I mean, there's just like so many incredible routes and so many people doing incredible things. And then like some of the bikes that people have, like there were 3 bikes stolen out of a building recently, and it was like $60,000 worth of bikes. 3 of them, they found them.
Gosh.
But
oh, good.
Anyway, people have some serious bikes.
People do have some serious bikes. Yeah. And yet you have to a lot of people do it out here professionally
Right.
long distance wise.
The pros closet, you just buy their bikes.
Yeah. My husband did that actually.
There you go.
And it's worked great. Yeah.
Cool. What's the next adventure you're prepping for, thinking about?
Well, and I know you can give me some insight on this. I would love to do rim to rim to rim.
Ooh.
And haven't yet.
Ooh.
And I feel like your story is mostly a positive one, despite some moments you've shared.
It was about as good as it can get. If you feel good the entire time when you do something like that, you're either on drugs or you're on drugs.
Which I'll take your drugs. That's fine.
They're little sugar cubes.
Yeah. They're called Scratch. No.
Yeah, that was the kind of thing. So my story with Rim to Rim, a buddy, Tony, and we've done a lot of adventures together. He grew up in Boston. We met each other at November Project. He moved out to San Francisco, and we stay in touch by like doing epic things together.
Yeah.
Going to Tahoe, going to Arizona, etc. This was like winter going into 2018. Is that true? 2019. And he was like, yeah, putting together a group. Let's do Rim to Rim. I was like, cool. I can do that. I'm in. And so that was February of 2019. And so Rim to Rim is 21 miles with 5,000 or 6,000 feet of gain. And I was like, yeah, I can do that today. And so the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, I can do that today. So I should do Rim to Rim to Rim because I can't do that today. And so my previous longest distance prior to that was a 50K, which took about 7 hours, 7:14 in Tahoe. So it also had 5,000 feet of gain, but it was spread out over the 50K, whereas Rim to Rim, it's not spread out. So we get to the North Rim in 7 hours and 7 minutes. And I was like, great, that's like my longest run ever. Let's go do it again.
Why not?
So I recommend something like that because how far is the farthest you've run so far?
A 50K.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's similar or same.
Yeah.
Well, I guess 50Ks can be different distances. I learned that recently.
I know, which is kind of wild, especially when you talk about like comparing like times and whatever.
It's like, oh, your 50K was 33 miles.
Yeah.
31. Anyway, I think the like getting in over your head kind of a feeling is really important to do.
Yeah.
We were talking before we started recording about the overlap between business and endurance sport. And I think that's an example of like a perfect overlap, right? You have to have big goals in order to be successful, but the goals I don't think should be the like metric of success. The metric of success is like you're doing the work, you're doing it on a daily basis, you're doing it on a weekly basis. And I think that's where like you can't run rim to rim to rim tomorrow. Maybe you can, but you feel like shit. So it's like the process of getting there and then the celebration.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's where the overlap is between business, which is like whatever your goal is can't be achieved tomorrow. And if it can, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that alignment.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, but I had never thought about the connection between business and running. And I even find in the like very little that I have learned in running a business, there's also that mentality of like you just become more confident in making mistakes or putting yourself out there. And I think that goes through with running and maybe goes back out to like going to a run club and not knowing what you're getting yourself into. But with a business, you're like, well, I have to put myself out there. I have to create this maybe like social media post or do whatever. And if it fails, okay, I learn, I'll redo it and I'll try again or what have you. And I think that's played really well for me in both directions. It's both helped me in feeling confident owning a business, but then also like for runs or doing rim to rim to rim, like, well, maybe, or biking up Mount Evans without clipless pedals. well, just try it. And if you have to turn around halfway or it's not going well, like that's fine.
Why are they called clipless pedals? They have a clip.
Thank you. I have no idea. And I used to get so nervous before I said it out loud, but they're clipless. I know. Two runners talking about.
Back to what you were talking about. Yeah, I completely agree. Like my boss would tell me if I'm not failing frequently, I'm not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing things with like such precision that I'm successful 100% of the time, a robot could do my job, right? Like there needs to be some human error in the like, how do I get better? How do we do things differently? How do we fail fast and learn from these kind of things? And again, running is like that sandbox where the margin of error is quite large, or the ability to make mistakes is large, and the magnitude of impact is pretty small, like for the most part.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I started, as you were talking about that too, I started to think about kind of how injuries play into that too. And you had someone on your podcast recently that talked about running is like mostly failing, I think. I can't remember who it was, but I thought it was so true and such a good point that you have to go through all of these failures. And not to say that injuries are failures at all, but I think you have to go through some of those moments and things to become a better runner. Like sometimes you have to go through like, I don't know, I tried rim to rim and now my Achilles really hurts. And sometimes that's just your body telling you like, okay, hey, maybe you should have only done rim to rim. Yeah. Or not at all. But I think we all want to run for the longevity of it. And so
For the long run.
I'm
working my branding.
There's so many puns and directions.
One direction.
You just have to like go through all of those. It's an important part of the process.
Totally. I had a pretty brutal injury a few years ago. Brutal in that it was the worst I've experienced. It wasn't bad, for the long run.
Yeah.
Maybe didn't work there. But anyway, bilateral stress reaction in the tibias.
Yeah.
And this was in 2020. So it was just after I did rim to rim. And then I paced a half marathon the next weekend. And then I lined up for a 50K. Wait, is this timing right? Yeah. 2019? Yeah, it is. And I DNF'd the 50K. I fell at mile 14 and DNF'd at 18 and a half because I couldn't stop any earlier, but every step was painful. Oh. And so I didn't run for a week, and then I got back into it. And I had run a lot of miles in 2019, and I had also run my marathon PR that spring. I broke 3 and PR'd by 20 minutes. And so I progressed a lot in that year. And then we just pushed on to 2020. And I think that, I know that we found the limit there. I say we, my coach and I, because of the bilateral stress reaction. And I ran a New Year's Eve day, basically half marathon at marathon effort with a friend, Amanda Nurse. She's like a 240 something Olympic trials qualifier. And another friend, Mark Vittor. And the next day I was like, I don't feel great. And the next 3 weeks sucked running. I had no power and just didn't feel right. And my chiro was, playing around with my pressing on my tibias, and he was like, I was screaming. He's like, that's not really the response that should be happening. And it was true on both. He's like, well, I obviously can't tell you what's wrong without imaging, but you should probably get some imaging done. And so I did, and I got x-rays and an MRI. I got an x-ray on both and one MRI. And he was like, well, if it's true on one, it's true on the other probably. So we'll save you $900 for not doing 2 MRIs. Anyway, long story short, well, that wasn't
long story.
I've already told the long story. I was so pissed. I was like, why am I injured? I work with a coach. I do blood work. I eat enough. I rest. I sleep enough. I do all these things that you're conventionally told to do in order to be successful. I was like, how did I get injured doing all of the right things? And the conclusion that I came to was, well, the point of training is like find the line and don't fall off on the other side. But when you're riding that razor's edge, like that's where breakthroughs happen, but that's also where breaks happen. I guess pun intended. Literally, yeah.
Yeah, figuratively.
Well, I avoided the break.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just a reaction. Anyway, I think that's the point, right? Like, all that to say that if you're not like pushing those boundaries sometimes and going too far, I think you're leaving a lot on the table. And then you find yourself on the table of a person like yourself. Yeah. But I don't think that that's necessary for everyone. I think plenty of people are just totally fine going out 3 or 4 runs a week, and that's what brings them joy. For me, it's the experience of getting better. And in order to get better, you have to sometimes go too far, right? Do you see that a lot?
I do. And what's interesting is kind of navigating that conversation of course, I don't want to see people in my office. I have like a catch-22 job of like, when I'm busy,
you don't want to see your friends.
I don't want to see anybody in my office, but of course it's going to happen. The like injury prevention conversation, because I don't want that to then lead someone to be afraid of injury or then find themselves injured and then have all this blame and guilt and shame. And I would love your thoughts on this too. Like, how do you find that with injury, you have an easier time going through that because you trust the process maybe a little bit more?
I think I do now. I was like really angry at first about that. Again, it was like the biggest injury I'd had, and it was in both of my legs.
Double whammy.
Sorry, can you say the question one more time?
Just like how I think injuries are hard. Like you need a moment where you kick and scream.
Yeah.
And you're frustrated and why? But then how did you get to the point, if you're there, where these things happen? Do you feel like you can overcome them better, or maybe are in a better mindset when they happen because you trust the process of running?
Yeah, I think it's the like exposure therapy with it. The more you are around it and see it with others and then eventually experience it yourself, the easier it becomes to navigate yourself. So like now I've gotten to a point where I'm happy to take a day off if needed. But 5 years ago, I was allergic to rest days and like absolutely would not take days off to be preventative. And somebody said something that stuck a while ago, is like niggles are your body whispering to you before it starts screaming. And so when that's how I interpret something that doesn't feel great, but doesn't feel awful, like I want to put that fire out before it becomes something worse. And so if I take a day off, great. That kind of a thing. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it does become part of the process, and it does become, I don't know if it's easier to grapple with, but it's more accessible to grapple with it.
Yeah.
Like having been around it more. And then I'm in this position of luxury where like I have the like view into a lot of elite athletes and what makes them tick both mentally and physically. And just seeing some of the stuff that doesn't get posted on social media and like hearing what my friends are going through, that these are professional athletes that aren't always sharing the shitty parts, but they're going through the shitty parts. And some of them are sharing the shitty parts, but those shitty parts exist whether you're running a 6-hour marathon or a 2 and change marathon. And that's the universal experience. Like nobody is perfect all the time. And if you are, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah. I know. I think you're so right. Sometimes I think about the idea of maybe on top of having a run club, we also have like a support group.
A dinner club.
A dinner club. Yeah. Oh, I love that dinner would be involved. Like ham steaks and hamstring tendinopathy. I don't know. And we talk about both. And if people could just bring their experiences and frustrations, on anything.
Ham steaks and hamstrings.
Is ham steaks a thing? I don't know.
I think it would be hamstrings and ham steaks.
Yeah, that also sounds like a band. Like a folk band.
Probably up at Gold Hill.
Probably.
They probably perform there.
Yeah, next Saturday, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have a support group. But yeah, just so that we can get together and talk about
Tendons and tenders. Sorry.
Oh. Nailed it.
I was like, I gotta come up with one.
But exactly. I mean, how fun would that be?
Talk about differentiation.
Yeah. Could turn into an anatomy lesson too, really.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Some chicken tenders have the tendons in them, which I, not on purpose. Anyway. What were we talking about?
We were talking about bluegrass bands in Gold Hill.
Yeah. With their next hit single being tenders and tendinopathies. But
with apple pie on the side.
Oh gosh, I saw you had their apple cobbler or something.
Really good.
Yeah. But I think going back to the injury conversation, like it's hard to, I feel like I have to be there for runners as a listening ear, understanding frustrations, letting those frustrations out. I get a lot of people cry in my office, and it is always the best day for, well, I was going to say the best day for me. That's very selfish, but it's such a good moment of, I feel like when people let that out, they feel better physically. Like they're like, I feel so much better. And I'm like, I did nothing, but great. I'm glad you think I did
listening
something.
is like...
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, again, talking about like injury prevention and how we view injury, they're going to happen. They're inevitable. We don't want them to happen. I think doing strength training and mobility and doing all the work can help make them less severe. Or maybe you get them and you recover faster because you've built a great amount of strength around them. But we never know how they're going to happen. And it's probably, like you said, when we're pushing that line really, really hard, which is a why of why we do this. Like we want to push ourselves hard. And sometimes we tip the line and hurt something, and that happens. But
I love that. I'm curious. I was about to ask about the role of you as not a therapist, but someone who listens. I have that relationship with my chiropractor, Brian Kent, in Boston.
Yeah. Where
I would just babble for 45 minutes. And sometimes it was about running and sometimes it wasn't. And it's just like I wonder why that medium presents that opportunity to do that.
Like why at the chiropractor's office? Yeah, I don't know. I'm so glad that you've had that experience. My hope is that everybody has that experience. What I've loved and appreciated about having a private practice is that I can see people for an hour or longer or whatever and give the person that opportunity to do that versus like, all right, I probably only got 20 minutes. I gotta like take out my notepad and be like, okay, tell the doctor this, and this. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really hope that everyone is having that experience, but I think it also shows how multifaceted injuries are. Maybe it only happens in offices where we talk about injuries that affect our sport and our love. There's such an emotional piece, and that has to come out at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that that's common in your profession?
That what's common?
That people have that experience with their practitioner?
I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest. When I was working in other clinics before I branched off on my own, I never had that opportunity with patients, just because, unfortunately,
like
they're
a level of comfort.
Well, I had a level of comfort, but there was never time, which was so unfortunate. Like you were seeing people for 30 minutes, and you had to get so much done in 30 minutes. And then the unfortunate truth is like you as a practitioner knew you couldn't make time for it because of like billing insurance and insurance things and the unfortunate world of that. But the connection was always there. There just wasn't the opportunity of like, I've spent half an hour with people handing them Kleenexes because they're crying about like another, stress fracture, whatever it is. And I just find those moments to be so good and so helpful. Because if you don't let that out, your body holds tension for so many reasons. So if you don't let those conversations happen, there's still going to be this level of tension that exists.
So why did you go into doing what you do?
That question. I've had that question a lot. It's also a question you have to answer in almost every like PT school application. And so at first it was like, because I want to help people. But, and I became a PT and I love this profession because of how you can help people in that way. And I think I've always wanted to be in the medical field, but the way you can empower people with their own body is just beautiful, I think. Like, especially with high-level athletes, I've been so fortunate to work with runners and people up in Boulder who are so motivated, who are so jazzed about movement. It's awesome. And just to be able to help people either like avoid surgery, recover from a surgery, get back into running, and when they never like thought they could or they're going to hang up the hat, it's really, really rewarding. And that's kind of why I went into it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why would somebody see a PT in general?
Ooh, that's a great question. For any reason.
If they need to be handed Kleenex.
Yeah, if they want to come have ham steaks.
Chicken tenders.
Yeah, chicken tenders. Kneecaps and bottle caps.
Whoa,
yeah?
I like that.
Yeah, great, thank you. Why would they come see a PT? For so many reasons. I think what's great about this profession is it's grown so much that as a PT, you can practice in like so many different avenues. And like I've worked at a hospital. I've worked with patients with like very severe pulmonary and cardiology diagnoses. Like you can just do so many things. But I guess specifically as a runner, to go see a PT, like preventative, I have people come see me who are like, hey, I am about to go into race season and am like pulling off the cobwebs of off-season time. I want to see like where my body's at. And I love doing that. Kind of like, okay, let's revamp your strength routine. Let's focus on these areas. Let's remind you that, oh yeah, that's right. You haven't stretched your psoas in a while and you should probably stretch your psoas. Yeah, not directed at anybody we know. But
don't at me.
Yeah. So kind of for like the tune-up preventative reasons, obviously for understanding like why, even for a niggle, like why is a niggle happening and how can I prevent this from going further? You can also, I can't speak for every state, but in Colorado, physical therapists can order imaging. So if you feel like, and everyone should be an advocate for themselves. Like if you feel like, hey, I don't know, this doesn't feel right. I'm worried I have a stress fracture, whatever, reach out to your PT. Chiropractors can do it too. But we can do that and spend time going over that.
Different than Massachusetts.
I know. It's different in every state, which is wild. Yeah. Same with the dry needling. Can they dry needle in Massachusetts? Yeah. Which is crazy. But for understanding mechanics, I do gait analysis with people. So going through running form, mechanics, bike fits. I think what I love about working with so many different types of athletes is sometimes a lot of the mechanics can be somewhat similar. And in Colorado, it's likely that people are doing more than just one thing. And so how, you can come see your PT to learn how to safely and correctly navigate all of those things without hurting yourself too much.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this. If people want to follow you and your coffee chats and chicken tenders and anyways,
soon. Yeah.
Where can they find you?
Thank you for asking. They can find me on Instagram under Boulder Sports Physio. You can also find me on the PR Labs website. PR Labs has its own Instagram and website, which is just prsportslab, I believe.com. Not the I believe. .com, I believe.
Very Ted Lasso.
And I have a Facebook, but I'm on Instagram more. Or if you're in Colorado, like stop by PR Labs, come to the Inside Tracker runs, which I think the next one's the end of April.
Last Wednesday of April.
Last Wednesday of April.
And last Wednesday of May. And last Wednesday of June.
For the long term.
I see what you did there.
You're welcome.
We'll work on the taglines.
Always pop in and say hi or reach out to me on social media. Happy to always be a resource, answer questions at any time.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much, and we'll see you out there.
Thank you too, Jonathan.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.